Howdy ho, everybody. Welcome back to the Rocks Roost. And it's time for something completely different. We're going to do a tier list today. This is going to be our first one here in the Roost. We just finished up The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. I thought it might be fun to do a tier list of the dungeons and talk a little bit about them. Now, there are going to be some criteria for this video and for this tier list. The first, obviously, as I think is the most important thing, is the fun factor. Is the dungeon fun to go through the first time? Is it fun to go through the 100th time? Is it an enjoyable experience? Is it memorable? That sort of thing. So that's kind of our number one criteria for this tier list. But also cleverness of puzzles. Now, in this particular game, there aren't any real brain busters, except maybe one, but there's a way that we can get around that. So puzzles are not our main criteria here, but if there is a good puzzle in a dungeon, it'll give it a few extra points. And of course, flexibility. This is a big theme in this game, but also in its sequel, A Link Between Worlds on the 3DS. But if a dungeon can be done out of order to make things more streamlined or more fun, then it gets some extra points for that. And if a dungeon is susceptible to out-of-the-box thinking or tricks, it also gets points for that. Now, there aren't going to be any actual points. We're just putting them in a tier list relative to one another, but it's things to think about, to give you an idea of how I'm thinking about this. And the last thing is the teachable moments. What teachable moments are inside each dungeon, and how do they contribute back to criterion one, the fun factor. Okay, so again, there's not going to be any actual point tallies or anything like that. We're just doing a tier list, but these are how I'm thinking about the dungeons as I put them onto the chart. So let's see how we do. The first one is Hyrule Castle. This is the rainy night. This is the very beginning of the game when Uncle wakes you up, or you wake up rather, because of his commotion, and you hear the telepathic message from the princess that she needs help. One of the cool things about the dungeon, and I want to tell you, I'm including the road to the dungeon also in this, because the tutorial messages from the guards I think is very clever. The guards that you encounter at the various intersections that keep you on the path to go toward Hyrule Castle. The castle does a really good job of teaching us about the color coding of enemies. We see green guards. We see two different kinds of green guards. The ones with the little dirks that can't be alerted and come after us, and then the ones with the swords who can. And then, of course, there are the blue ones, the blue guards, and then the big flail guard that's down in the dungeon guarding the princess. So I think this is a really, really good dungeon. It's a wonderful, excellent first dungeon, and there are lots of wonderful teachable moments. So I'm going to put this in S tier. Next thing, a lot of people consider this to be part of the same dungeon. That is the escape from the castle. This is the sewer and road to sanctuary. This is also a great dungeon. It's fun. It's simple. You learn some very important things here. You learn how to light torches. You learn how lit torches affect adjoining rooms and how they don't affect different floors when you go upstairs or downstairs. The torches you lit don't affect the new floors. You learn that rats are a very good source of rupees, so that's very good. And in the picture here, you see, this is actually when you come back into the lit area under the sanctuary. You remember there's the bombable wall or dashable wall right there. This is teaching you that there are things in this game that you will see that you'll have to get new items or power up and come back to. So again, I think this is a very good dungeon. It is not classically structured though, so it's a strong A. I may give it an S eventually when we end up with the final ranking, but if you put that as an S, I wouldn't blame you. I wouldn't blame you at all. Okay, Eastern Palace. This is the first quote-unquote real dungeon for the light world. again, teachable moments abound here. You learn that, and also I should say that you learn in the castle and also in the sanctuary, I believe that, or the road to the sanctuary / sewer, you also learn that enemies can drop key items, like the main boss of the castle dungeon drops the big key. There's a rat that drops a small key in the underground passage. That's a key thing that you're taught through those dungeons, and definitely those teachable moments bump those up in the ranking. Eastern Palace has those as well. You learn about floor switches. You learn about enemies that can only be damaged with certain weapons, like the Igors. And it's a fun dungeon to go through. It's short. It's relatively easy, even on your first playthrough. And that's okay, because it is the first quote-unquote real dungeon. I'm going to put this in an A. I think it's an A. You could also rank that as an S, and I wouldn't blame you either. Okay, Desert Palace. Desert Palace is a cool one because you have to get an item from outside the dungeon to actually get in. So this teaches you something else, that you sometimes need key items to get into dungeons. I mean, it's just that simple. The other thing that's cool about it is the location. I've always been partial to desert temples. Spirit Temple in Ocarina of Time, some years after this game, is another classic example of a great desert dungeon. I like the multiple entrances. I like that the boss chamber is hidden in a cave back behind the dungeon, but that you have to go through the dungeon to get to it. I really enjoy this dungeon. The Light World dungeons, of course, don't really have a whole lot of flexibility to them. There's a way you do them. There are probably some glitches and things you can do, but generally they're just really fun, really simple, and full of teachable moments. Because it really could be argued that the entire Light World sequence is a very extended tutorial, and that the real game, at least as insofar as the dungeons are concerned, doesn't happen till you get to the Dark World. The Desert Palace, I'm going to put up on the S. I've thought about this list a whole lot since I decided to do it, and I'm still not sure exactly where to put that one. It's kind of an A, but the multiple entrances, the boss being in a cave out back, having to get the Book of Medora, all that, I think just kind of edges it up for me a little bit. Okay, now we have Tower of Hera. It's kind of aggravating to get to, but you learn a key mechanic. You learn how to go to the Dark World and come back out of the Dark World and use that to traverse terrain that otherwise you could not do. Inside the dungeon, you learn about hard hat beetles and how aggravating they are. But more than that, you learn important mechanics like the crystal switches and the star switches. And this is a dungeon that is just slam full of teachable moments. It's also, like the other Light World dungeons, short, fun to play. The boss, the Moldorm, is fun to fight. He's on that platform that you can fall off of. And you can, if you leave the crystal switches set just right, you can fill up your hearts and go back up the stairs and fight him again. And you get a good sense of this particular Link's tenacity and stick-to-itiveness, and it teaches you that this game rewards players who will just keep at it. You know, I had trouble with the Moldorm as a kid, and if you watched my playthrough, you saw I still have trouble with him on occasion, although I would argue that's mostly camera trouble. I mentioned while I was playing through that the Tower of Hera was my favorite Light World dungeon, so it should come as no surprise that that is an S tier. Mostly for the teachable moments. Mostly for the teachable moments that are inside. And sorry if the list keeps going slightly up, slightly down. I'm trying to come up with the best way to do this. I just refuse to create an account for Tier Maker. I don't like the way these sites use your data and that sort of stuff, when you can easily make a tier list with Photoshop and run it on PowerPoint. If you have any pointers on how to do this a little bit more smoothly, do let me know. All right. Anyhow, back to the list. Now we're on Hyrule Castle Tower. This is when we get the Master Sword and we're going to kick Aghanim's tail. And this dungeon is super, super cool. Fun factor through the roof. This dungeon is designed to make you feel like a total badass. You have the Master Sword, you are powered up, and if you can keep full hearts and keep the sword beam, you can just slay this dungeon. I mean, it just is wham, bam, bam. And if you watch my playthrough, you'll see that I do that. If you lose hearts, like I often did when I was younger, it's still fun to play through. It is a memorable dungeon. It is short. It is basic. It is clear the floor, go upstairs, clear the floor, go upstairs, clear the floor, go upstairs. But it's super fun. There aren't any real puzzles in there, but it's all about combat. You've got a new sword and you want to use it. And you're sick and tired of Aghanim, and who you don't know at that time is actually Ganon, ruining the land, and you're there on a mission. It also re-emphasizes the color-coded enemies. You have the red guards in here as well. You could have met them earlier, but in the cemetery, especially the graveyard, but in here you will meet them on the playing field as an unavoidable enemy that you must clear to open a door or get a key, etc. I just really, really love the castle tower. And then the fight with Aghanim. You know, you've got the option of fighting him with the bug catching net, which is just crazy. I know that's not intended. That's just a coding thing, but it's still pretty fun. It's a fun boss fight. The dialogue with Aghanim before you go in is relatively memorable. It's definitely memorable when you quote unquote beat him. I won't say beat him. We bested him in battle one time, and he draws us into the dark world. It's hard to forget that. I'll draw you into the dark world. It's very memorable. And then, of course, the climax of that battle is you end up on the Pyramid of Power, which is super fun. Again, I'm going to put this in S tier. This game is near and dear to my heart. And these dungeons are going to be ranked kind of high. All right, it's time to jump into the Dark World. We're going to be looking at the Eastern Palace's flip side in the Dark World, the Dark Palace. Now, this palace is not so bad. Is it fun? I mean, it's not particularly fun. It's not unfun. It's just kind of boring. I really hate the rupee requirement to get into it. It feels arbitrary and forced. It felt that way back in the day. It feels that way now. I feel like it would be more interesting if the monkey required something besides money. Like if there was something you had to go out and find and bring back to him, even if it was as simple as a banana or something like that, you know. I think that would have been infinitely more interesting than just paying him. There are some neat tricks you can use inside the dungeon, but they're not required and they're not all that beneficial. You have to do this dungeon first. At least, yeah, I'm pretty sure you do. Without glitches, I'm pretty sure that you have to do this dungeon first, because you need the hammer to open up the rest of the Dark World, unless, of course, you do the early Dark World glitch up on Death Mountain. But barring that, which you know your casual player is not going to know about or maybe even care about, you have to do this dungeon first. This dungeon is just kind of boring and not interesting to me. I'm putting it on C tier. Putting it on C tier. Yeah, that's where I'm putting it. Okay. The boss is fun, though. The Helmasaur King. I enjoy fighting him. Swamp Palace. Now, if you watch my playthrough, you know that I did not go through the dungeons in order, but we're going to go through them in order here in the tier list. Okay. Swamp Palace, number 2. This palace, it's okay. It's an upgrade over the Dark Palace. It's a palace that we have to do something in the light world first to be able to get into. Or at least, you know, to get into proper, you have to open the sluice gate in the light world. So it reinforces the the idea that the light world and the dark world are connected, and it teaches that in a very meaningful way. It's a fairly fun dungeon. It's not too easy to get turned around in. It's fairly straightforward, but nevertheless, it's kind of fun to go through. The boss is super fun. And of course, you get the hook shot, everybody's favorite thing. Well, that's probably a gross generalization, but a lot of people seem to like the hook shot, and especially based on the discourse we heard when Breath of the Wild came out and later Tears of the Kingdom, both of which had no hook shot. But Swamp Palace, overall, it's pretty good. I'm going to put it, it's an A. It's an A. And the way I'm going to look at these, okay, is the ones that are closest to the letter are ranked the highest, and the ones down through here are ranked the lowest, because I'm thinking as we go down this way, we're actually getting closer to A, and we go down through here, we're getting closer to B. Does that make sense? Anyhow, I may rearrange these in the final evaluation, but this is what I'm thinking. Okay, Skullwoods. Skullwoods is a dungeon that could have been great, but ultimately just fell flat. Cool things about Skullwoods: multiple entrances, some of which are hidden. That's super cool. The enemies in there are pretty cool. You've got more Beeries and Baris, and you've got Gibdos for the first time, which I've always liked the Gibdo. The Gibdo having the weakness to fire is also super cool. Using the medallions in the Skullwoods is a definite plus. It'll make you feel like a total powerhouse because of that fire vulnerability. Bombos is great. If you watch me play through it, I'm a little bit more partial to Ether, because you can use that Ether plus hammer to basically have a self-powering medallion. All that said, what's wrong with Skullwoods? Well, for all the flavor, and it does have a heck of a lot of flavor, the puzzles are not very clever. The puzzle is, which entrance do you go into and in what order? It also has wall masters, which are always kind of a drag. I am not in favor of a wall master enemy. I just really don't think that's interesting. Having an enemy that can just grab you at some point and take you back to the beginning of the dungeon is horrific, especially if it's a dungeon like Skullwoods, where it, not so much like Skullwoods, but kind of like Skullwoods, where it might be aggravating to get to wherever you are when the wallmaster gets you. And Zelda being a puzzle-centric game generally, and definitely an atmospheric game, I like to be able to look at my surroundings and think about what's going on. I don't like the pressure of a wallmaster. It is sort of artificial pressure. I enjoy the pressure of something like a Lionel in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. Until you really know how to fight a Lionel well and you've practiced, there is a tremendous amount of pressure there, because your weapons are fragile. So that means by default, you only have a certain number of hits. Your healing is relatively limited, and they hit really hard, especially the higher level ones, like the white ones and the gold ones. That kind of pressure I like, because I can identify a threat, I can choose how to engage with it, and then I can engage, and then I process how to deal with the engagement. A wallmaster just throws that all out the window, and I just hate them. It's just that simple. I didn't like them in Zelda 1. I don't like them here. And I really hate them in Ocarina of Time. But anyway, these things all go together to make Skullwoods not great. And on top of that, the boss is just frantic, and the damage just seems like it's really swingy. It's hard to even see what's going on. It takes a while to get good at Mothula. And it's just, at the end of the day, it's just frantic for being frantic. Or at least that's the way I feel. I think that using the fire rod could have been done in a more interesting way with the boss. I do like the idea of the treasure being the fire rod and the boss being a moth. So moth and flame, eternal enemies kind of thing. I do like that, but I just don't think it's executed all that well. And sad to say, I'm putting Skullwoods in the F tier. Okay, a little bit of an upgrade now with Thieves Town, or Gargoyle's Domain, whatever you want to call it. The game calls it Thieves Town in the end credits, and That's what I think most people call it, but was it Nintendo Power? There was some publication back in the day that called this Gargoyle's Domain. There's another dungeon we'll get to that has a misnomer too. We'll talk about it when we get to it. The Gargoyle's Domain is fine. I find it easier than even the first dungeon in the Dark World. It's not easier than any of the Light World dungeons, I don't think. I mean, it's hard to say because I've been playing this game so long that I've developed a skill set that makes all the dungeons seem relatively easy, and they're all highly memorized, you know, but I do feel like Thieves Town would make a more reasonable second dungeon. And in fact, in our playthrough that we just finished, it is my second Dark World dungeon. And I think it fits really well for that. Not only because of the slight difficulty curve. Again, it could be argued it's easier than Dark Palace, but there are some enemies in there that are a little bit aggravating, like the Geebos, those blobs that send the pink core out and you have to slash it. And these Zaks, those horse guys, the blue and pink ones, they're kind of aggravating. But yeah, it's a slight upgrade over the first palace, the Dark Palace, first Dark World Palace, but I don't know why it's not number 2. The second reason why I think it's a great second palace to go to in the Dark World is because of what it gives you. You get the Titan's Mitt in here, which allows you lift 3, which lets you pick up the heaviest rocks, which give you a easy way to get in and out of Thieves Town, because it opens up the teleporter, the quick way to the teleporter that's just north of Kakariko Village. It also, and very importantly, opens up the path to the blacksmith's apprentice, or the other blacksmith. I always, in my mind, I've always called him the apprentice, but I think he's his brother. They're equally skillful, kind of like the lumberjacks, I guess. But that lets you rescue the blacksmith's partner. And that gives you access to the tempered sword. And that then also gives you access to the 4th bottle, which I think, especially if you've not played this game at all or not much, having that 4th bottle is super important, because you can have up to 4 fairies. You can also have up to 4 potions of your choice, and you can mix and match. Again, if you're new to the game, you're probably going to be pretty thirsty for potions. I remember being that way when this game came out. I was younger, but I think even an adult or a seasoned player who's never played this game is probably going to rely on the potions pretty heavy, especially in the Dark World. So it makes sense to play Dungeon 4 second. Why am I going on and on about this? Well, that goes back to flexibility. And this is what makes Dungeon 4 or Thieves Town really shine. It is flexible. You can jump in there as soon as you have the hammer. Okay, so as soon as you've done Dark Palace, head on over to Thieves Town and get the Titan's Mitt and finish this up. The boss is a little bit frantic. He's fun. He's also cool because he's mentioned several times by several NPCs before you even meet him, Blind the Thief. He's kind of a legendary character in Hyrule, and apparently he's disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to him, but of course we know he ended up in the Dark World. And he disguises himself as a maiden quite hilariously. And it's funny. And the rabbit beams, this is the first dungeon where you'll meet the rabbit beams if you do it second. And that's just funny the first time you see it. Oh no, all of a sudden I'm a rabbit again. It counteracts the moon pearl for a little while. And I think this dungeon is fun. A lot of people don't like it, but I think it's fun. It's a little bit convoluted until you learn where everything is, and then it literally is just a bam, bam, bam. And you see that in my playthrough. I've go in the door, and before you know it, I've got the big key, the compass, and the map. And that's all contained within that first block of 4 big rooms. And they can be aggravating until you know how to go through them. But once you do, it's a bam, bam, bam kind of thing. That I find that fun. And then the second half of the dungeon is all about getting the mitt and getting the quote unquote maiden. And then the duel with Blind the Thief. So I think this is a great dungeon. And it's definitely an A tier. I will put it on the lower side of A tier though. That seems to make sense to me. Alrighty, now it's time for everybody's favorite, the Ice Palace. Now, you either love or you hate this place. If you are a casual player who has never played this game before, and you are going by the suggested order that the game itself gives you on the map screen, you probably really hate this dungeon. And there are some valid criticisms. Now, if you're doing this dungeon in the game's recommended order as the 5th dungeon in the Dark World, and you do not know how to do, or you don't want to do, things like bomb jumps, which you saw me do in my playthrough, then this dungeon requires you to go through it not once, not twice, but 3 times. And it's relatively tedious if you have to do that. It is combat heavy, which a lot of people don't like. I don't mind. I think it's kind of a fun change of pace personally, but to each their own. I understand not everybody's big on the combat. Also, the thing about the dungeon is there are these slippery floors all over the place, and nobody likes slippery floors in video games. And I will say, I don't like them, but it is thematic, so I'm not going to ding the dungeon for that. The cool thing is this dungeon is that it has a very interesting dichotomy. Like I said, it's love or hate. If you go through the dungeon in the recommended order without bomb jumps or any advanced tactics, this dungeon is probably a D or an F tier. Even for me, if I was not able to either do Misery Mire first and get the Cane of Samaria to make the block puzzle easier, which keeps you from having to go through the dungeon a 3rd time, or I didn't know how to bomb jump, I would put this dungeon at D or F tier easily. But because you can do Misery Mire first, and if you want to do bomb jumps, the dungeon becomes just a breeze, especially the famous Ice Palace bomb jump, which if you don't know how to do that, I'll put a link to that video up in the corner. I show a real easy way to do it. And if you don't have the hook shot like I didn't, you have to do 3 total bomb jumps, all of which are pretty easy. And if you watch my Ice Palace bomb jump video, you'll learn how to do the most difficult one. And then the other 2 are inside the actual episode where I play through the Ice Palace. And I put chapters in videos so you can jump right to it if you want to see it. But anyway, because I played Ice Palace with bomb jumps, that gives it mega points for flexibility. You can do this dungeon as early as 3rd in the Dark World. Do Dark Palace first, then go do Dungeon 4, Thieves Town, get the Titan's Mitt, because you have to have the Titan's Mitt to get into this dungeon. So you can do it as early as 3rd. And I love, love, love that. So again, if you're doing the way I do it, if you play the game the way I play it, then that's an S tier. If you play the recommended way that the game recommends, it's probably an F tier. Okay. Speaking of going to Misery Mire, it's time to talk about that dungeon. And this is the other one that has an alternate name. In the old publications, this sometimes was called Misery Maze. Misery Maze and not Misery Mire. The game calls it Misery Mire in the end credits when it counts up your total games played. And that is the agreed upon name now. But occasionally you may see or hear someone refer to it as Misery Maze. It's the same thing. This dungeon is cool because it requires one of the medallions to actually get into. When you first get to the Swamp of Evil, where the dungeon is located, there's a massive thunderstorm. And an NPC at some point will tell you that if you have strong enough magic, you can blow it away. And sure enough, the Ether Medallion, which is one of my favorite items in the game, I may have to do a tier list on items too. That might be fun. But anyway, the Ether Medallion just blows it right on away. Misery Mire is full of wizrobes, and a lot of people really don't like wizrobes. I'll give you that the wizrobes in Zelda 1 are just awful, particularly the blue ones. But the wizrobes in Link to the Past are really not that bad. You can just kind of chill out, wait for them to appear, and then slash them. But if you really don't like Wizrobes, then you're really going to hate Misery Mire. But I love Wizrobes. I like the concept of a Wizrobe. Okay. Don't take that out of context. Zelda 1, I hate Wizrobes, but in Link to the Past, I think they're a cool enemy. And in general, it's kind of a cool idea to have a wizard type enemy that hounds Link with magic spells. I think that's kind of neat. This dungeon also has some alternative ways you can go about it. You can actually get in this dungeon without the hookshot and get through it without the hookshot. A lot of people think you need the hookshot to get in past the first room. There's a pit there. You do not. And again, in the playthrough, I show you how to do that. You just bonk off of a block with a dash and hold to the right, and you'll get right across it. You can also run just fast enough to be able to collect the treasure without having to fall through the floor or having the hook shot. So this dungeon does have a high degree of flexibility, has a high degree of fun. I think it's a cool dungeon aesthetically. It's green. Green is my favorite color, so maybe I'm a little biased there. But the slime aesthetic, the swampy, miry aesthetic is present on the walls and in the final boss, who is a giant eyeball and with little eyeballs, and he's called Vitreous, which the vitreous humor is the slime that's inside your eyeballs. So it's all very thematic. All in all, it's a very cool dungeon with an okay boss. I think the eyeball theme is overdone in the Link to the Past. I'm sure a lot of people think that, but he's okay. He's one of the more interesting eyeball bosses, I think. And the item you get here is pretty cool too. The Cane of Samaria creates blocks that can be picked up and thrown or disintegrated into magic beams. And you need them to create platforms in Turtle Rock, which is the next dungeon. Misery Mire, I'm going to put that on A tier. I think it's very, very good. In fact, let's see. I would say I would put Swamp Palace maybe down here. We're getting into the more nitty-gritty. I'm trying to get this as neatly as possible. Misery Mire maybe, I don't know, maybe right here. Why am I putting the passage ahead of Misery Mire? I don't know. That doesn't make sense. This is a very strong A. And if you put that on S, I would not blame you. Turtle Rock, Mario-themed dungeon. S tier. That's just the cool thing about it. It's a fun dungeon. It is Mario themed. It's inside a giant turtle. There are pipes everywhere. There's lava everywhere. There's guru bars, which are these fire rod things that swing around and around. There's an enemy in there. It looks like a pokey. It's just a cool dungeon. It's not difficult. It has a fun boss. It has a fire and ice theme. What's not to love about Turtle Rock? It's awesome in every way. And that brings me to the final dungeon, Ganon's Tower. And I believe that Ganon's Tower is the best dungeon in this game. And it is also one of the best dungeons in the Zelda series. Why is that? Because it has a branching path that loops around to the same thing. Your first goal is to get the big key and get the red mail. When you go into the dungeon, there are doors on the left and on the right. You can pick the way you go. If you go to the left, it's a little bit more puzzle centric. If you go to the right, it's a little bit more combat centric, but both of them meet up at the same place, which allow you to get the big key and the red mail. There are also many ways to use tricks in here. The bonking against the block is something you can do several times in this dungeon to make things easier for yourself. And in fact, the developers show you how to block bonk. Okay. There's one place that's against, at the end of this long corridor where the turrets are shooting at you. And down at the end, you can go up at the door, but there's two blocks, the pushable kind. They're not pushable, but the square blocks with the beveled edges at the end. And across, there's a little gap There's a 1 block wide, 1 tile wide gap, and a bombable wall on the south side of the room. And you say, how do I get there? How do I get there? Well, you bonk across it with the Pegasus shoes. And this is the developer saying, hey, you can bonk with those. And I remember realizing that as a kid, and that is what first made me realize that, hey, there's probably multiple ways this game can be played and indeed beaten. It was because of that moment in Ganon's Tower. And I love that. The other thing, in the big room that is sort of the meetup point of the 2 branching paths that has the dark floor, and you have to use ether or light the torches to see it, there is a bonk skip there. And I just love that. I just love that. Any kind of dungeon that has multiple paths to victory is just wonderful, especially in the early days like this, because in 91, 92, this is still early days of video games, really. There are many things that are being worked out now that later become a big deal and later become conventions, not just for this franchise, but gaming in general. And this game is very responsible for setting Zelda up as a well-defined series, and it gives gaming a tremendous number of conventions as well. Further, in Ganon's Tower, you have the rematches with the bosses, which is very fun. They're all fun. The Armos Knight with the icy floor is not the greatest in the world, but it's still relatively fun because you have the silver arrow, 1 hit, 1 kill, boom, 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 boom. They're done. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. The rematch with Aghanim, which of course leads to the fight with Ganon, which is a fun fight all told. And once you learn how to do it, you can do it super fast. And for all these reasons, I put Ganon's Tower not only in S tier, but as the highest possible position. So let's go ahead and move these over like that and plop him up there, right in his rightful place where he belongs. That is how you do a final dungeon in a Zelda game, and it just paid off beautifully. So that is my tier list of the dungeons of The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. What do you think? How would you rank all the dungeons based on these criteria? If you'd use different criteria, what would they be? Tell me in the comments. I look forward to discussing this with you. We can also talk about this on Discord if you like. We do have a Discord server set up. There's a link in the description if you'd like to join up and hang out in the server with me and the other cool people. Also, if you like this video, please leave a thumbs up. If this tier list does pretty good with views and likes and that sort of thing and comments, I will take that as a sign that y'all want me to do some more, and I'll be glad to do them. I have a lot of other ideas in mind, like Zelda items and that sort of thing. I have a few other things that I'm kind of keeping hush-hush right now, but if you like the tier list, let me know by liking the video and leaving a comment. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so. We are closing in on 200 subs, which I think is just pretty darn fancy. And I really appreciate each and every one of you who are watching now to the end. Your time, your attention is invaluable, and I appreciate it more than I could ever tell you. For now, I'll bid you adieu wherever you are, whenever you are. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.